Christopher Walter Monckton, 3rd Viscount Monckton of Brenchley, is a former prime ministerial advisor on scientific and domestic policy to Margaret Thatcher. In 1986, he advised her that global warming might be a problem and recommended it be investigated. 2 years later, Ms. Thatcher established the Hadley Center for Prediction and Research. In 2007, Lord Monckton wrote a report concluding that global warming would not be a global crisis. It was published in the Sunday Telegraph, where it was the most read article ever. Lord Monckton is a world-renowned climate change expert, having twice testified before the U.S. Congress. He has addressed a Tea Party rally in Houston, a high-level briefing at Lloyd's of London, and the European, German, and Danish parliaments. He also attended the UN Climate Change Conference in Copenhagen. He has been with us before. Let's welcome back to the Global Freedom Report the 3rd Viscount Monckton of Brenchley, Lord Monckton. Welcome back.
Well, good day to you, and what a pleasure it is to be with you again on the Freedom Report.
Well, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to have you. Last year, we spoke with you about global warming in the Copenhagen Summit. It's less than a year later, and we have gone to the opposite end of the spectrum. There are growing numbers of scientists stating now that the Earth is entering a new ice age. You were instrumental in helping the world to know that global warming was essentially a fraud. Is the same thing true with these ice age predictions?
I think where we've got to go with this is that, yes, we are 5,000 years overdue for a new ice age. However, it would be very foolish of me or anyone to be able to say that I could predict when the next ice age is going to come, or indeed whether it will be much warmer or much cooler in 50 years, let alone 100 years, than it is now. If you want my best guess as a layman and as no real expert in this, then I would say that because carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas and it does cause some warming, it may be a little bit warmer in 50 years and a little bit warmer still in 100 years than it is today. But where the real scientific debate centres is on how much extra warming we're going to get. And the very large, very extreme projections which are put forward by official sources such as the UN's climate panel, the IPCC, are clearly now exaggerations, and more papers in the peer-reviewed literature are finding the courage to say so. So I think we are seeing a big shift in scientific opinion, which is probably just as well because there has, as you know, over the last year, been an enormous shift in public opinion away from alarm and panic about all this nonsense and towards a much steadier understanding that we really can't say that it's at all likely we're going to get extreme temperature rises or falls, for that matter. The climate is not really very much altered by our influence on it, and therefore this is a non-problem, and the best solution to a non-problem is to leave it alone and have the courage to do nothing.
What is, and I understand you're not a scientist here, but we toss around the term ice age. What exactly is an ice age? Do we have a definition?
Well, certainly it is an age in which the amount of ice that is around in the world is not just confined, as it is at the moment, to the North Pole, the South Pole, Greenland, the Himalayas, and one or two glaciers, well, I say quite a lot of glaciers, actually 160,000 of them, scattered around the world, mostly in Antarctica. But instead, the ice, for instance, in the last ice age, covered most of the northern United States and the whole of Canada to a depth of 2 miles. So you have much more ice around, the whole planet much colder than it is now, probably sort of 8 or 9 Fahrenheit degrees colder than it is now. And that cold, when it does come again, if it does come again, because we can't really tell for exactly why these ice ages come and go, each of the last 4 ice ages, which we can get some idea of how long they lasted for by measuring the air trapped in ice at different layers representing different ages in the Arctic and Antarctic, I should say, and in Greenland, we can work out that each ice age would have lasted something like 120,000 years. And then you get just 5,000 years, typically, of what's called an interglacial warm period, like the present one. And each of the previous 4 interglacial warm periods, occurring roughly at intervals of every 125,000 years and lasting for just 5,000 years, has been around 5 or 6 Fahrenheit warmer than today throughout those 5,000 years. So today's temperatures are not exceptional. There's nothing special about them. Indeed, even if you go back through our present interglacial warm period, which has lasted about 11,400 years, more than twice as long as the previous 4 had lasted, during 9,100 of those 11,400 years, according to a paper that's just published, the temperature was warmer than it is today. So these ice ages are very cold periods, and of course ice is a real killer. It's no accident that only 1% of the world's species live in the Arctic and the Antarctic, where it's cold and dry, but 90% live in the tropics, where it's warm and wet. Warmer means more life. Colder means less life. So if the planet gets warmer, and preferably warm enough so that we can actually prevent ourselves going into the next ice age, then for the sake not only of humanity, but of most of the plant life and animal life of the world, the fending off and deferring of the next ice age would be an unqualified benefit.
Do we have any idea? I mean, how can we say that for the last 800,000 years there have been ice ages that last for 100, 120,000? How can we actually say that? What are the indicators to tell us when we look back in time that we've had this many ice ages?
That's a very good question. I'll tell you how it's done. I'll tell you exactly how it's done. What they do is they drill down in Antarctica and in Greenland, where the ice is, at the South Pole, for instance, the ice is land-based ice, and it is 8,852 feet deep. There's a lot of ice there. And this ice gets packed down in layers each year as it snows and builds up during the winter, and then it doesn't quite melt, but it leaves a kind of signature when it's the summer. And it leaves, rather like tree rings, it leaves ice rings layer by layer all the way down. Now, the further down you go, the harder it is to distinguish each annual layer from the next. But nevertheless, they have been able more or less to reconstruct by this means the history of the air trapped in the snow as it falls and eventually packs down into ice. And they can sample that, and the way they do it to tell what the temperature was prevailing on the Earth at the time when that particular air was trapped. And this is, of course, the Antarctic temperature or the Greenland temperature, because those are the 2 land-based ice sheets where you have enough ice to do this, is they take the air and they measure the ratio of 2 different isotopes of oxygen in the air, and that ratio has been found by laboratory experiment to give you a very good idea of what the prevailing atmospheric temperature was at the time when the air got trapped. So it's very clever stuff. I mean, what one has to do, one has to say and give credit to the climate scientists who do this research. Their ingenuity would put Hercule Poirot to shame. This is real detective work, and it's very clever stuff, but it is quite reliable.
I like that. Now, when was the last ice age? How long did it last?
So the last ice age ended 11,400 years ago, having lasted, with one brief intermission about 15 or 17,000 years ago, it lasted about 120,000 years.
So
ice ages are the norm in our present world, and interglacial warm periods like the present one, which has lasted 11,400 years, are the exception. They happen just at intervals of 120,000 years. You get this very brief period in geological terms of just a few thousand years of warmth, then it goes back to an ice age again.
Yeah, so what you're saying is we live in abnormal times. Are we talking of
abnormally warm times? Yes.
Yes. Are we talking a full-blown ice age where, like, everything is covered in sheets of white, like the animated movie Ice Age? Is that what we're talking about here?
Absolutely. I mean, you could go, for instance, to Washington or New York, or where Washington, New York now is, and you would have had, 12,000 years ago, you would have had 2 miles of ice above your head. That's how thick the ice was. It had built up over the millennia with snow falling on it and being packed down, and then only when something, and we don't really know quite what, caused the ice to melt again, we think it's to do with variations in the Earth's orbit, then suddenly the ice melts. And what was really remarkable was at the end of the last ice age, more or less exactly 11,400 years ago, temperatures in the Antarctic ice that are trapped there appear to have risen by 9 Fahrenheit degrees in just 3 years. And when you think that in the whole of the 20th century, we only saw 1.3 Fahrenheit degrees of warming in 100 years, you can see that 9 Fahrenheit degrees in 3 years, that was global warming. And so what's happening now is just perfectly normal. Both the rate of warming and the absolute temperature are nothing in the least surprising, either in the present interglacial warm period, where, as I've said, nearly all the years since 11,400 years ago have been warmer than the present, but also each of the previous 4 interglacial warm periods was noticeably warmer than the present. There is nothing special either about today's absolute temperatures or about the rate at which temperatures have been rising over the last 300 years since the end of what is called the Little Ice Age, when the sun kind of shut itself down for 70 years and we got a lot less solar output, and that meant that the Thames in London and the Hudson in New York used to freeze over every winter. Well, now that's nothing compared with the real ice age, but it's known as the Little Ice Age because caused by this anomaly in the sun where for 70 years there were no sunspots, and therefore we can infer there was much less solar activity. And really what we're seeing now is still essentially just a recovery of global temperatures after that exceptional period of cool, thanks to the inactivity of the sun over those 70 years, 350 years ago.